Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to Ancient Epics, the place where the greatest stories of humanity come back to life. Long before pyramids pierced the desert sky, before kings carved their names into eternity, a silent revolution unfolded along the winding banks of the Nile. It was not forged by armies or announced by thunder, but etched slowly into clay, stone, and reed. This revolution was writing itself born in shadow, guarded by ritual and feared as much as it was revered. Few civilizations bound writing so tightly to the divine as ancient Egypt, where symbols were believed to possess breath, memory, and power. To erase a name was to erase a soul. To carve a sign was to command eternity. Archaeologists would one day uncover ivory tags buried beside predynastic kings at Abydos, marked with strange images of falcons, rivers, and standards. These were not mere decorations. They were among the earliest whispers of a system that would outlast empires. Some signs recorded grain and cattle. Others hinted at gods not yet named. Together they formed a bridge between the visible world and the unseen. Writing in Egypt was never neutral. It was sacred technology. The mystery deepens when the land itself is considered. Egypt was shaped by repetition, the annual flooding of the Nile, the daily rebirth of the sun, the cyclical march of stars such as Orion and Sirius across the heavens. In this world of rhythm and return, writing emerged not as invention alone, but as revelation, an echo of cosmic order fixed into form. From this moment forward, the spoken word would no longer vanish into air. It would endure, watching silently from temple walls as centuries passed like drifting sand. The story of Egyptian writing begins in the deep predynastic age, around the late 4th millennium before the Common Era. At this time, small communities clustered along the fertile floodplains, sustained by barley, emmer wheat, and the seasonal generosity of the river. Trade routes stretched outward toward the Sinai, Nubia, and the eastern desert, where copper, turquoise, and gold were extracted from harsh, stony landscapes. These early mining expeditions required administration counts of goods, records of ownership, symbols of authority. Memory alone was no longer sufficient. From this need arose marks, simple pictorial signs scratched onto pottery, bone, and stone. A jar marked with a scorpion, a seal bearing a rosette. These images were not yet full writing, but they carried meaning beyond ornament. They identified places, rulers, and quantities. Over time, repetition refined them. Certain images gained fixed associations. A foot no longer meant merely a foot, but movement. Water lines came to signify the river itself or the sound associated with it. Meaning began to crystallize. By the dawn of the early dynastic period, around 3100 BCE, Egypt was unified under a single kingship. This political transformation accelerated the evolution of writing. Royal administration demanded precision. Taxes were levied in grain and cattle. Temples required inventories of offerings. Tombs required names, titles, and prayers to guide the dead beyond the western horizon. Writing answered all these demands, and in doing so, it grew more complex and more sacred. Hieroglyphs, the most famous Egyptian script, emerged fully formed in this era. The word itself would later mean sacred carvings, and the name is fitting. These signs were not abstract letters, but living images. Birds with detailed feathers, eyes that seemed to watch, serpents coiled in eternal vigilance. Each hieroglyph could function in multiple ways. It could represent an object, a sound, or an idea. A single sign might serve as a picture, a phonetic value, or a determinative clarifying meaning at the end of a word. This layered system reflected Egyptian thought itself, where the visible and invisible overlapped. Words were not merely spoken, they were enacted. To inscribe a text was to set forces in motion. Funerary inscriptions were believed to sustain the dead, ensuring access to food, breath, and rebirth. Temple texts upheld cosmic balance, known as Mat, aligning human society with the divine order of the universe. The materials of writing further reinforced its sacred character. Hieroglyphs carved into limestone temple walls were meant to last forever, their sharp edges catching the desert light. In contrast, a more fluid script known as hieratic developed for daily use. Written with reed brushes on papyrus, hieratic allowed scribes to move swiftly, recording letters, legal documents, medical texts, and hymns. Though less pictorial, hieratic retained deep connections to hieroglyphs, preserving their sacred lineage. Papyrus itself was a gift of the Nile. Harvested from marshes along the riverbanks, its pith was sliced, layered, pressed, and dried into smooth sheets. These sheets were then joined into scrolls, light enough to carry yet durable enough to preserve thought across generations. In the hands of trained scribes, papyrus became the nervous system of the state. Scribes occupied a unique position in Egyptian society. They were not merely clerks, but guardians of knowledge. Training began in childhood, often within temple schools, where students copied classic texts again and again until signs flowed effortlessly from hand to page. Wisdom literature praised the scribal life above all others, describing it as clean, eternal, and free from physical toil. Through writing, a scribe could speak with kings, gods, and the dead. Beyond administration and ritual, writing reached toward the stars. Astronomical texts recorded the movements of decaan star groups used to measure time during the night. The heliacal rising of Sirius, whose appearance heralded the annual flood, was noted with reverence and precision. These observations were preserved in writing, linking celestial cycles with agricultural survival and royal legitimacy. Archaeological discoveries continue to illuminate this early phase. At Abydos, royal tombs reveal ink inscriptions on pottery dating to Egypt's first dynasties. In the Wadi el-Hol, inscriptions carved along desert trade routes suggest experimental stages of writing, where signs bridged image and sound. Each discovery confirms that Egyptian writing did not appear suddenly, but grew organically from landscape, belief, and necessity. By the end of this formative era, writing had become inseparable from Egyptian civilization itself. It defined authority, preserved memory, and bound the human realm to the divine. Every sign carried weight. Every text was an act of preservation against chaos and forgetting. Yet this was only the beginning. Writing would continue to evolve, adapting to new languages, new empires, and new ideas, while never losing its ancient soul. The firelight still flickers on those first carved signs, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. As centuries unfolded and dynasties rose and fell, Egyptian writing did not remain fixed in stone. It breathed, adapted, and expanded alongside the civilization it served. The Old Kingdom, often called the Age of the Pyramids, marked a profound transformation in the purpose and reach of writing. No longer confined primarily to administration and royal display, written words now became vessels of immortality on an unprecedented scale. Within the pyramid complexes of kings such as Unas and Teti, walls were inscribed with sacred utterances now known as the pyramid texts. These were not narratives meant for public reading, but powerful compositions of spells, hymns, and ritual instructions. Their purpose was singular: to guide the king's soul beyond death, past the dangers of the underworld, and into the eternal sky among the imperishable stars. Writing here was not descriptive, but was performative. The carved words themselves were believed to activate divine forces. The choice of hieroglyphs within these chambers was deliberate. Dangerous creatures such as serpents were often carved without heads or split in two, symbolically neutralizing their threat in the afterlife. This careful manipulation of signs reveals a belief that writing possessed agency. Symbols were alive. They could protect or harm, sustain or destroy. In this worldview, literacy was a form of controlled power accessible only to those trained to wield it responsibly. Beyond the royal tombs, writing spread through temples dedicated to gods whose identities grew ever more complex. Ra, Osiris, Isis, Thoth, and countless local deities were honored with hymns, myths, and theological reflections preserved in writing. Thoth, in particular, came to embody the divine essence of writing itself. As lord of wisdom, measurement, and time, Thoth was believed to have gifted hieroglyphs to humanity, anchoring writing firmly within sacred tradition. As administration grew more sophisticated, so too did scribal practice. Hieratic script became increasingly dominant in daily affairs. Its flowing strokes allowed for speed and efficiency, essential for managing estates, recording legal disputes, and maintaining correspondence across long distances. Surviving papyri reveal contracts detailing land transfers, wills ensuring inheritance, and court records preserving testimony. Writing had become the backbone of order, preserving justice beyond the frailty of memory. The Middle Kingdom ushered in what many scholars regard as a golden age of Egyptian literature. Writing now carried introspection, moral reflection, and narrative depth. Wisdom texts advised proper conduct, humility before the gods, and loyalty to the state. Stories such as the tale of the shipwrecked sailor blended myth and realism, using carefully crafted language to explore fate, divine mercy, and human resilience. These compositions reveal a culture deeply aware of language as beauty and its ability to shape inner life. During this period, education became more systematized. Scribal schools emphasized not only copying signs but mastering style, grammar, and rhetorical balance. Red ink marked headings or corrections, while black ink formed the main body of text. Writing tools themselves carried symbolism. Palettes often bore the names of officials or prayers for favor. Even the act of writing was ritualized. A natural environment continued to influence script and content. The desert, with its silence and danger, appeared frequently in literary metaphors as a place of trial and revelation. The Nile, ever central, was praised in hymns that recorded its life-giving inundation with poetic precision. Geography became text, and text became geography, mapping meaning onto the land itself. As Egypt entered periods of fragmentation and foreign contact, writing adapted again. New administrative demands arose under the influence of Nubian, Libyan, and Near Eastern interactions. Loanwords entered the language, and scripts absorbed subtle changes. Yet continuity endured. Hieroglyphs remained the prestige script, reserved for monuments and sacred contexts, while hieratic continued its practical role. By the New Kingdom, Egypt stood as a vast empire stretching from the Levant to deep Nubia. Imperial administration required unprecedented volumes of correspondence. The Amarna letters, written primarily in Akkadian cuneiform but annotated by Egyptian scribes, testify to a multilingual world where writing mediated diplomacy, marriage alliances, and war. Egyptian scribes operated comfortably across linguistic boundaries, their training allowing them to navigate multiple systems of signs. Within Egypt itself, a new script emerged, Demotic. More cursive and abstract than hieratic, Demotic reflected the accelerating pace of life. It became the script of contracts, personal letters, and local governance. Though visually distant from hieroglyphs, Demotic remained conceptually linked, preserving phonetic structures and grammatical patterns rooted in ancient tradition. Religion, too, evolved through writing. Funerary texts once reserved for kings spread to nobles and commoners. Coffin texts and later the Book of the Dead democratized the afterlife, allowing many to access spells ensuring safe passage beyond death. These texts were often customized, with names inserted into established formulas. Writing here was both personal and universal, blending individual hope with cosmic order. Astronomical and scientific knowledge continued to be recorded with care. Medical papyri detailed diagnoses and treatments, blending empirical observation with spiritual understanding. Mathematical text demonstrated sophisticated grasp of geometry and fractions, essential for architecture and land measurement after floods. Each calculation, each remedy, was preserved through signs perfected over millennia. Archaeological finds from Deir el-Medina, the village of royal tomb builders, offer intimate glimpses into daily literacy. Ostraka flakes of limestone or pottery shards bear notes, sketches, complaints, and prayers written by workers and scribes. These informal texts reveal that writing was no longer confined solely to elites. It had seeped into the rhythms of ordinary life, capturing humor, frustration, and devotion. Yet despite this expansion, writing never lost its aura of mystery. Certain texts were restricted, guarded within temple libraries. Names of gods and secret spells were believed to hold immense power, accessible only through proper initiation. The balance between accessibility and sanctity remained carefully maintained. Through all these transformations, one truth persisted. Writing was the thread binding Egypt's past, present, and future. It preserved kingship, shaped belief, organized society, and carried memory across the abyss of time. Each stroke of ink echoed earlier hands. Each carved sign mirrored the first images scratched beside the Nile long ago. Still, the story was not complete. New powers would arrive, new languages would press upon the old, and writing itself would face its greatest test survival in a changing world where the ancient firelight began to fade. As foreign winds swept across the Nile Valley, Egyptian writing entered its final, most fragile chapter. Yet even in this age of challenge and transformation, the ancient scripts refused to vanish quietly. They adapted once more, bearing witness to resilience as enduring as the stone temples themselves. When Persian rule reached Egypt in the 6th century before the Common Era, administration expanded but local traditions remained respected. Egyptian scribes continued to write contracts, prayers, and records in Demotic, while hieroglyphs still adorned temples rising at Philae, Edfu, and Dendera. These late monuments demonstrate astonishing continuity. Even after 2,000 years, the sacred signs retained their authority, their proportions carefully measured, their symbolism deeply understood. Writing still served the gods, still anchored ritual to eternity. The arrival of Alexander of Macedon and the founding of the Ptolemaic dynasty marked a turning point unlike any before. Greek language and culture entered Egypt not as passing influence, but as ruling force. Alexandria rose on the Mediterranean coast as a center of learning unmatched in the ancient world. Within its legendary library, texts from across continents were gathered, translated, and studied. Egyptian writing now existed beside Greek alphabets, philosophies, and sciences. This coexistence produced one of the most remarkable developments in the history of writing: bilingual and trilingual texts. Priests and scribes, navigating a multicultural society, inscribed decrees in hieroglyphs for the gods, Demotic for the people, and Greek for the administration. The most famous of these inscriptions, carved in dark granodiorite, would one day become the key to unlocking a lost world, the Rosetta Stone. Yet during its own time, the Rosetta Decree was not revolutionary. It was an assertion of continuity, honoring a Ptolemaic king through traditional Egyptian forms. Hieroglyphs were still understood, still read aloud in temples, still believed to carry sacred force. Demotic remained the language of contracts and daily affairs. Writing endured, though its audience was slowly narrowing. Under Roman rule, this narrowing accelerated. Latin administration replaced Greek in official contexts, and Christianity began reshaping spiritual life. Temples closed, priesthoods dissolved, and with them vanished the last communities trained in reading hieroglyphs. By the 4th century of the Common Era, the sacred script had fallen silent. The final known hieroglyphic inscription was carved at Philae in 394 CE, a quiet farewell etched into stone beneath a fading tradition. For centuries afterward, the meaning of Egyptian writing was lost. Travelers gazed upon temple walls covered in signs they could no longer interpret. Some believed them to be mystical symbols encoding universal truths. Others thought them decorative or magical charms beyond human comprehension. The true linguistic nature of hieroglyphs, phonetic, structured, precise, was forgotten entirely. Yet writing, though unread, still endured physically. Sand buried temples but preserved them. Dry desert air protected papyri sealed in tombs. Egypt itself became an archive, waiting patiently for understanding to return. That return began slowly, guided by curiosity rather than conquest. When scholars of the Islamic Golden Age encountered Egyptian monuments, they recorded observations with care and respect, preserving descriptions that would later aid rediscovery. Knowledge passed quietly across generations, even when full comprehension remained just beyond reach. The decisive moment arrived in the modern era when the Rosetta Stone was studied with renewed determination. Scholars recognized that its Greek text mirrored the unknown scripts above it. Through painstaking comparison, patterns emerged. Names of kings appeared repeatedly enclosed in cartouches. Sounds were proposed, tested, corrected. Finally, in the early 19th century, hieroglyphs spoke again. The ancient voices, silent for over a millennium, returned to the world. This rebirth of understanding revealed the full scope of Egyptian writing. Texts once shrouded in mystery now offered histories of kings, prayers whispered to gods, letters sent between friends, medical instructions, and personal hopes etched for eternity. Writing was revealed not as cold monumentality, but as deeply human expression. Archaeology continued to expand this revelation. Tombs in the Valley of the Kings yielded richly illustrated funerary texts. Workmen's villages offered humble notes and accounts. Desert inscriptions mapped trade routes and pilgrimages. Each discovery added nuance, confirming that writing permeated every level of Egyptian life. Beyond content, the philosophy of writing emerged clearly. Egyptian scripts were never merely tools of communication. They were acts of alignment with cosmic order. To write correctly was to uphold balance. To preserve text was to preserve Mat itself. This belief explains the extraordinary conservatism of hieroglyphic art, where forms changed only gradually, guarding continuity across vast spans of time. Even in death, writing remained essential. Names were protected fiercely, for to forget a name was to annihilate existence. Titles ensured honor. Spells ensured rebirth. Writing bridged mortality and eternity, granting humans a share in the permanence of the gods. Today, Egyptian writing systems stand among humanity's greatest achievements. They demonstrate how language can shape civilization, bind memory, and reflect belief. From the first scratched signs on pottery to the final sacred inscriptions at Philae, this tradition endured for more than 3,000 years, longer than any empire, longer than any dynasty. The firelight of ancient Egypt still flickers within these signs. Each bird, each eye, each flowing line of ink carries echoes of hands long gone, minds attuned to river, star, and stone. Writing transformed Egypt, and Egypt transformed writing, together crafting a legacy that refuses to fade. In this legacy lies a reminder written without sound, that civilizations endure not only through power or conquest, but through the care with which they record their understanding of the world. Egyptian writing was memory made eternal, and through it, the ancient land still speaks. If these ancient voices touched your heart today, Please consider subscribing to Ancient Epics and ringing the bell so you never miss the next forgotten tale. Thanks for watching.